The Black Sea coast of southern Russia. Thoughtful? The Sheskari's oil terminal, occasionally supplied to one of the largest crude export hubs on the entire Black Sea, a facility that moves up to 75 million tons of oil per year and holds 1.28 million cubic meters of petroleum in its tank farms, is on fire. NASA's firm satellite system detected the thermal anomaly at exactly 2:48 a.m. Ground-level observers in Novorossiysk reported a glow on the horizon minutes before that, and Russian regional authorities in Krasnodar Krai had already declared an air raid alert at 7:06 p.m. the previous evening and 7 hours before the fire started, because they knew something was coming. They didn't know what. They didn't know when. They didn't know how many. What they didn't know was that Ukraine had launched a coordinated multi-target drone offensive that would hit the Sheskari's terminal, hit the adjacent Grushova oil depot, hit a tanker in the Black Sea named the Chrysalis, described by Kyiv as part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet, and simultaneously strike a Russian military frigate and a hovercraft missile boat anchored near the Novorossiysk naval base, all in the same night, all before dawn. And there is a third element to this strike that nobody has fully explained yet. We will get there. But first, you need to understand the scale of what Ukraine has now built, because this is not a one-off attack. This is the culmination of a campaign. And that campaign is changing the economics of this war in ways that are starting to frighten people inside the Kremlin, in ways that 4 years of frontline fighting never quite did. Signal number one: Ukraine is no longer fighting a territorial war. It is fighting a financial war. And right now, it is winning that war. Here are the numbers, and they are staggering. In the first 23 days of May 2026 alone, Ukrainian drones attacked 13 major Russian oil facilities. 13 in 23 days. The commander of Ukraine's drone forces, Robert Brovdy, confirmed this on Saturday morning. He also said something that, if verified, is one of the most consequential military economic statements of this entire conflict. 6 of Russia's 10 largest oil refineries have stopped processing crude oil following Ukrainian strikes. 6 of 10. The Kurishi refinery, one of Russia's 3 largest, operated by Surgutneftegas with an annual processing capacity of 20 to 21 million tons, production on May 5th after Ukrainian drones damaged 3 of its 4 crude distillation units. 3 of 4. The Kurishi refinery alone accounts for more than 6% of Russia's total refined oil output. That is fuel for tanks, fuel for aircraft, fuel for the logistics chain that feeds the front line. Gone. And since early 2026, the cumulative Ukrainian campaign against Russian energy infrastructure has disrupted an estimated 700,000 barrels per day of refining capacity. That is not a rounding error. That is a structural wound. But let's be precise about what happened in the early hours of this morning, May 23rd, 2026, because the specifics matter enormously. Ukraine's general staff confirmed the strike on Telegram at approximately 9:30 a.m. The targets were 2. First, the Sheskari's oil terminal in Novorossiysk, Krasnodar territory, operated by PJSC Transneft, Russia's state-controlled pipeline monopoly. Transneft is not just a company, it is the arterial system of Russia's entire hydrocarbon export economy. The pipelines that feed Sheskari's run from the Caspian, from Kazakhstan's Tengiz field, from western Siberia. The terminal is the end point, the export valve, the place where Russian crude becomes Russian revenue. Its throughput capacity of 75 million tons per year means that on any given day, this one terminal handles roughly 1.5 million barrels. What burns there tonight is not just oil, it is money. Second, the Grushova oil depot, the largest tank farm in southern Russia. with 1.2 to 1.4 million cubic meters of storage capacity, which is a key component of the Sheskari's complex. Both facilities confirmed on fire. Both confirmed struck. Two Russian personnel injured, hospitalized. Russian air defenses, which fired at the incoming drone swarm, intercepted a portion of the attack, but clearly not enough. And then the tanker, the Chrysalis, hit in the Black Sea in what Ukraine's military described as the basing area of Russia's so-called shadow fleet. That phrase, shadow fleet, is the key to understanding something that most Western coverage buries. Russia has spent the last 2 years building a parallel oil export architecture specifically designed to evade Western sanctions. Aging tankers, registered under flags of convenience in countries like Gabon, Cameroon, Palau, vessels with obscured ownership, insurance arranged outside London markets, tracking systems that go dark in the Black Sea. The shadow fleet is how Russian oil still flows to India, to China, to Turkey, despite the G7 price cap, despite the sanctions regime. Ukraine is now targeting that fleet directly in the water. The Chrysalis was not a military vessel, it was a sanctions evasion vessel. Its destruction is an economic strike, not just a military one. But here's the catch. And this is where the story pivots in a direction that most analysts are not yet connecting. The Starobilsk dormitory. Friday night. A Ukrainian drone struck a college dormitory in Starobilsk, a city in Ukraine's Russia-occupied Luhansk region. The death toll rose to 11 by Saturday. 11 people killed in what Russia immediately characterized as a war crime against civilians. Vladimir Putin personally condemned the attack on Friday, called it a crime, and ordered the military to submit proposals for retaliation. At an emergency UN Security Council meeting, convened at Russia's request, Ukraine's ambassador Melnik Andriy flatly denied that his forces had targeted civilians, calling the Russian presentation a pure propaganda show. He said the May 22nd operation targeted military infrastructure collocated in the building. This is not an abstraction. This is the political context in which the Novorossiysk strike is landing on Saturday morning. Russia is already in a posture of demanded retaliation. Putin has already told his generals, "Give me options." And now, hours later, Ukraine has lit one of Russia's most important Black Sea oil terminals on fire, destroyed the adjacent depot, hit a shadow fleet tanker, and attacked warships in Novorossiysk harbor. All in a single night. That is the sequence that matters. The sequence. And here's what it tells you about where this conflict is right now, because the diplomatic backdrop to this military escalation is, in the bluntest possible assessment, a disaster. Let's run the timeline. May 9th to May 11th, Trump announced a U.S.-mediated three-day ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine paired with a 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner exchange. He called it the beginning of the end. The 3 days passed. Russia fired over 200 drones at Ukraine the moment the truce expired. Zelensky said Russia was not observing the truce, nor even particularly trying to. The ceasefire, celebrated by the White House on a Friday, was functionally dead by the following Monday. This is not new. In early May, Russia and Ukraine had declared competing, non-overlapping unilateral ceasefires. Russia's for May 8th to 9th, Ukraine's for May 5th to 6th. During Russia's declared ceasefire window, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha reported that Moscow had launched 108 combat drones and 3 missiles at Ukrainian cities during a ceasefire declared by Russia itself. And the larger peace process? The U.S. brokered diplomatic effort that Trump promised would end the war before he even took office? It has been, to put it precisely, sidelined. Euronews reported in March that U.S. brokered ceasefire talks were put on hold due to the Iran war. Middle East crisis, drawing Washington's attention, resources, and diplomatic bandwidth away from Europe's largest conflict since 1945. The peace track has produced a meeting in Istanbul in May 2025 that produced no ceasefire but did yield a prisoner exchange agreement. A second meeting in Istanbul in June 2025 that lasted barely more than an hour and produced nothing. Competing ceasefire proposals through the spring of 2026 that neither side honored. And right now, as of this morning, no confirmed next round of talks, no mediator in the room, no framework holding. Into that vacuum, both sides are escalating. Russia with its drone barrages, Ukraine with its energy war. Here's what nobody is telling you plainly enough. The hardliners on both sides are winning, not the diplomats, the hardliners. On the Russian side, Putin's generals have been ordered to produce retaliation proposals for Starobilsk. The IRGC of Russia's military, if you will allow the analogy, the Tsar Inalier, the hardline faction within the Russian military command that has consistently argued that the only path forward is total destruction of Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, particularly the power grid, the railway system, the port of Odessa. Those voices are now louder after Starobilsk than they have been in months. Russia's pattern is established. Ukrainian strike on something Russia considers a civilian or symbolic target. Russian escalation against Ukrainian cities. The cycle feeds itself. It has fed itself for 4 years. On the Ukrainian side, the drone force commanders are not interested in a ceasefire that freezes the front line where it currently sits. Deep inside Ukrainian territory, with Russia occupying approximately 20% of Ukraine, including Crimea, most of Luhansk, large sections of Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson oblasts. Robert Brovdi is not building Ukraine's drone strike capacity to stop using it. He has just told the world that 13 major Russian oil facilities were hit in 23 days. He has just confirmed warship attacks near Novorossiysk harbor. He is accelerating, not decelerating. And Zelensky himself, speaking earlier Saturday, Skarka described the strike on the Metafrax chemical plant in Russia's Perm region, more than 800 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, as one of our long-range sanctions against the Russian oil refining industry, and explicitly said, "We will continue along this path." That is not the language of a leader preparing to accept a frozen conflict. That is the language of a leader who believes he can change the economic math of this war fast enough to matter. Now, the third element, the thing I mentioned at the beginning, the detail that reframes everything else. Xi Jinping, China, and a phone call. Benzinga's reporting on the Novorossiysk strike includes a detail buried at the bottom that most readers will scroll past. Prior to the current escalation, Chinese President Xi Jinping told President Donald Trump during Trump's visit to China that Russian President Vladimir Putin could eventually regret his decision to invade Ukraine. Xi Jinping telling Trump that Putin might regret this. That is not a statement that comes from a country that is unconditionally backing Russia. That is a statement from a country that is quietly, carefully beginning to calculate what a prolonged Russian military failure, an economic collapse driven by Ukrainian drone strikes on refineries and export terminals, means for China's own strategic position and energy supply chain. China is Russia's largest oil customer. Chinese refineries are buying discounted Russian crude that cannot reach its traditional European markets due to sanctions. That crude flows, in significant measure, through exactly the kind of Black Sea export infrastructure that Ukraine is now systematically destroying. The Sheskari's terminal at Novorossiysk, the Tuapse refinery on the Krasnodar coast, struck by Ukraine in April 2026, burning for days, toxic benzene and xylene emissions creating environmental contamination across the surrounding region. These are the nodes of a logistics chain that ends in Chinese ports. When Ukraine burns Sheskari's, it is not just hurting Russia's budget. It is disrupting China's energy supply. And when Xi tells Trump that Putin might regret the war, he is, in his calibrated diplomatic way, signaling that Beijing's patience with this conflict is not infinite. That signal, that quiet private repositioning, is the thing nobody in Washington is fully processing yet. Because if China shifts its posture even marginally, if Beijing moves from tacit support to genuine pressure on Moscow, the entire financial architecture that has kept Russia's war machine funded begins to weaken in ways that no amount of Western sanctions alone could achieve. Let's bring it back to the ground, to Novorossiysk, to the fire still burning at the Shashkaris terminal. As you watch this on Saturday morning, Russia's air defenses intercepted a portion of the drone swarm. They always intercept a portion. The Russian Defense Ministry said its forces destroyed 348 drones in total from Ukraine overnight across all regions. 348 interceptions in a single night. And the terminal is still burning. That tells you everything about the mathematics of drone warfare. Ukraine manufactures these drones domestically at a cost that analysts estimate at between $20,000 and $50,000 per unit for the longer range variants. The infrastructure they are destroying is worth hundreds of millions. The Karishi refinery alone, before the strikes, was processing crude worth billions of dollars per year. The Shashkaris terminal handles 75 million tons annually. At current oil prices, that throughput represents revenues that flow directly into the Russian federal budget, revenues that fund salaries for 600,000 Russian soldiers currently deployed in Ukraine, fund munitions production, fund the drone and missile programs that kill Ukrainian civilians in Kharkiv and Odessa every week. Ukraine has found the economic jugular, and it is squeezing. The geopolitical domino effect from here is not abstract. 6 of Russia's 10 largest refineries have stopped processing crude. If that number reaches 7 or 8, if the Novorossiysk strike and the ongoing campaign continue to compound, Russia faces a domestic fuel shortage, not just an export revenue problem. A domestic supply crisis. Russian petrol stations in the Krasnodar region, the Leningrad region, the areas closest to the strikes, have already seen supply disruptions. A domestic fuel crunch in wartime Russia creates internal pressure that the Kremlin has worked extremely hard to suppress. It creates price inflation that hits ordinary Russians. It creates a political problem that Western sanctions alone, carefully managed and bureaucratically processed, never quite produced at the street level. Drone strikes do, and that is precisely why Putin's hardliners want massive retaliation, not because they think it will stop Ukraine's drone campaign, it hasn't in 4 years of trying, but because they need to demonstrate to the Russian public that pain is a two-way street, that escalation has consequences, that the fire in Novorossiysk tonight will be answered by something visible, something undeniable, in Kyiv or Kharkiv or Odessa. The only question that matters right now in the next 24 to 72 hours is binary. And it has been binary for months, but it is sharper tonight than it has ever been. Either the strikes on Novorossiysk, on Karishi, on Metafrax, on the Shadow Fleet, either this accumulating economic pressure breaks something inside Moscow's political calculus, creates a faction willing to accept terms, opens a door through which a mediator, Trump, Erdogan, Xi, someone, can move a real ceasefire proposal that sticks. In that scenario, the drone war has done what 4 years of frontline grinding could not. It has changed the cost-benefit analysis for Putin. It has made continuing the war more expensive than ending it. Or Russia retaliates with the kind of scale and fury that its military commanders have been urging for months. Massive strikes on Ukrainian cities, on the power grid, on Zelensky's administrative apparatus. Ukraine responds. The cycle accelerates. The peace process Already on life support, already sidelined by Iran, already ignored by hardliners on both sides, collapses entirely. And the world watches the Black Sea burn, oil prices climb, and a conflict that Trump promised to end in 24 hours enters its fifth year with no ceiling in sight. Breakthrough or collapse, de escalation or fire. The Sheskari's terminal is still burning. The next move is Russia's. We will be watching.